You are watching the best of the Alex Jones Show, weekdays from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. Central. Watch live at Infowars.com/show or become a member of InfoWarsNews.com and help us take resistance to the next level.
But there's another facet of this brainwashing. It's that state-run media and state-run education through Common Core is now getting direct access to even private school children if you're, quote, an accredited school. And so we had a chance to interview Ron Paul. I usually interview Ron Paul. I think he's on the show next week live with us. But Kit Daniels for InfoWars Nightly News was able to interview Ron Paul on the subject of Common Core and a bunch of other issues. And so I thought, why not just premiere this on the radio instead of the Nightly News show? We're going to air it in this segment and the next, and then I'm going to come back and get into some other news in the final segment on this Sunday edition. But here is former Congressman Ron Paul, Dr. Paul, the omnibudsman of the Libertarian Revolution, speaking to InfoWars when Kit asked him about Common Core.
Well, the whole thing is Common Core is an example of how the federal government wants to take over totally and completely the educational system. And they've been doing this for a long time. I mean, for more than 50 years, they've encroached upon control of local schools with the federal government getting involved back even into the 50s with the Department of Education, HEW being established. But Common Core is really the last straw, and the people are very upset for it because they want to set the standard for the curriculum for every single school, which means control, over the individual education of all the children. At the same time, we hear our president constantly saying, well, we got to get hold of these kids sooner. So it's not just grade school and high school and kindergarten. It's pre-kindergarten down to 3 and 4 years old. It's once again establishing and sticking to the principle that the children belong to the government, not to the parents. And anybody who cares about truth in education and not a monolithic education by the central government, they have to be concerned about this. And yet, unfortunately, it's marching right along, and too many schools are going along with it. So it is one common feature that's really upsetting a lot of people once they find out about it. Of course, the people already who have been upset with education for many years, who are already in private schools and homeschooling, know about it. There's a lot of people, just don't have the opportunity or the knowledge on how to get out of the public school system. So they're going to get exposed. I think it's going to be devastating. It's the wrong way to go.
Now, Dr. Paul, do you feel that politicians can use Common Core in order to prey on the ignorance of the public?
I think that's a good description about just about everything the government does, whether it's the education or whether it's keeping people from falling through the cracks, whether it's taking care of medical care. It's everything that they are all wise and they will take care of us, and people are stupid and they don't care and they're not responsible. And that's why you have to have government to take care of everybody and protect them from themselves. In this case, the government argues that we have to do this to protect the children against the parents. The parents are irresponsible. So, yes, I think it is. I believe those who think they're superior want the populace to be as obedient as possible. In case they need to send them off to war, in case they want to have them work and pay taxes. The whole thing is the state is sacred, and in order to have a state, the government, continue to grow, it's always at the expense of liberty. So it is the big challenge. I think we're seeing a conflict between these two movements. Governments have been around for as long as history's been around. I think they've exhausted their experimentation, and we've had some experiments with individual liberty. One great experiment was here, and I think right now we're seeing the fruitions of how we left that experiment in the last 100 years, and it continues, and yet there's a spirit right now among the people and many parents who are starting to realize that. The unfortunate thing is that we're still in the minority, and the majority still feel the government has to take care of me because there's too many people out there to say, well, I have to do this, I have to vote for this person, because they believe government should take care of me. So if I have trouble, the government's going to feed me, give me a job, They're going to take care of my medical care, and they're going to educate me, and they have this total dependency. But what we're witnessing is the failure of that system, too. You know, our American system of economics, of Keynesian economics and deficit financing, it's coming to an end. But yes, those in government would like to dumb down the population to be obedient. It's been that way for a long, long time. Over the many centuries, it's usually by threats and intimidation. Now we do the threats and intimidation, but we also try to bribe people to go along. And as long as they do what we tell them, as long as the people do what they're told to do, then they believe they can get better treatment from the government.
Senator Harry Reid declared that Cliven Bundy's supporters were domestic terrorists. And then today we find out that a White House counterterrorism chief suggested that if your child is confrontational, he could be a terrorist. Do you feel that this could tie into, as government gets more and more involved with public education, we see more and more radical talking points from politicians?
Yes, and they have certainly in the last 13 years since 9/11 taken advantage of this whole thing of terrorism. All they have to do is announce terrorism, and people are supposed to roll over and sacrifice all their liberties. And just think how much liberties we have given up in the last 13 years because we're always fighting terrorism. Even the recent history over in Ukraine, the Western Ukrainians were going in with their military to suppress the terrorists. They'll use that term anytime they can. They went in and they were surprised that there weren't any terrorists there, and they actually backed down and didn't even want to fight their fellow Ukrainians. So the whole thing sort of fizzled. But no, this is way overworked. It has conditioned us, especially since the Bush administration, that we're in a perpetual war. And it's always against terrorism, and terrorists can be any place in the world. The war never ends, and under war conditions, you have to sacrifice your liberties. So we're doing exactly what bin Laden was fighting for, was to bankrupt our country and destroy our constitutional rights here at home. So bin Laden is, even from the grave, is still winning this fight. And like you say, now they're even suggesting that whether you support landowners and individuals, who are doing ranching and or people going to private schools and challenge the government. He's a terrorist. They have to be called on this. The American people have to have a better understanding and a greater love for liberty. And of course, this has been one of the goals that we have in our homeschooling, is to teach what liberty really means and know how to spread a message so that they don't fall to this baloney about, the government is good, the government will take care of us, everybody else is a potential terrorist, and thank goodness the government can tax me and use the NSA and the military to suppress all threats of terrorism, and we'll have perfect safety. That is deeply flawed, but fortunately a lot of Americans are starting to wake up.
And do you have a response to Senator Reid for suggesting that political activism is terrorism, or even common behavior like that White House counterterrorism chief suggested could be terrorism?
Well, first off, people should probably just laugh at him, because it's so ridiculous. And I would think that he's practicing, a bit of terrorism on himself, by making these threats and intimidations. But the best way to answer to people like that is to refute them, either totally ignore them, laugh at them, or refute them with a better idea. I mean, they just throw these things out, and they have no meaning whatsoever. And yet, unfortunately, the major media is always on their side, and they would never call them on this. But somebody has to. Unfortunately, we have alternative media now, and I think that's the reason that we're making some headway with our internet and other methods of spreading a message.
Yes, and it's interesting that you mentioned the internet, because back in the 1970s, Murray Rothbard pointing out the difference between formal schooling and education, where education is a lifelong learning process. Now, with the advent of the internet and your homeschool curriculum, we're seeing that education doesn't necessarily have to come out of government-run schools. Do Do you think there's going to be a mass awakening in the future when a large degree of the population discovers the same thing?
Well, let's hope so. And I think that's the movement, because the government schools are opposite of education. I felt at many times after I got out of college, especially in social studies, sort of a relief, because I had enough introduction to what the world events were that my curiosity really struck me. But even when I got out of college, we didn't have the internet, but we had a few foundations like the Foundation for Economic Education, where I was able to seek out this information. That's when I got hold of Hayek and Mises, and then later on I got to be good friends with Murray Rothbard. And that is when I discovered what education was all about. Now, I think a lot more people are noticing this. Not only is it the quality of education, that strikes some, but I think it's also the violence in schools. You know, it just, really frightens the parents. And then when they put this together without getting an education. But the one thing that is really neat about all this is the fact that our side of the argument is very appealing to a broad base. It isn't appealing to the very wealthy. They're sort of on their own. You know, they preach all this government control of schools, you know, like all the politicians in Washington. But where do their kids go to school? Their kids go to private schools. But the middle class and many in a poorer class are recognizing that if they have any understanding, for their kids to get ahead, they have to get a better education, and the schools are not providing for this. And right now you see the great transitions. Colleges are going bankrupt. People aren't applying as much. A degree doesn't mean anything. They have all this money and they can't get a job. I mean, it is a disaster, and it is because government economic planning fails, and government planning on education fails, and this is why Common Core is going to be a total failure. It's going to make things so much worse. It's just trying to make people obedient to the state, and that get only information. It can't work. There's too much availability of information outside. So as bad as it is, we have reason to be optimistic about some of the changes going on.
And I've noticed that it seems like in the past century, Keynesian economics and the Federal Reserve has avoided blame for the damage that it has done to the economy. But it seems like now we're seeing an explosion of interest in Austrian economics. And I think a lot of it has to tie in the fact that students are going around former schooling and are self-educating, and they're learning about Austrian economics in that way. So do you feel that parallel institutions could be a great way to break the hold that the government has on society?
There's no doubt about it. And there are two things going on. The alternative sources for education is there, and we've talked about that, you know, the internet and different vehicles. But it's also something that we're witnessing is the failure of a system. I thought the greatest event of the 20th century, politically speaking, was the failure of the Soviet system, the collapse and the breaking up of that and the secession of 12, 13 republics from this domination of the Soviets. And because it failed, communism failed, although how many intellectuals in this country cheered it on? They cheered on communism, and of course there were some that were cheering on fascism and communism, and now welfareism and Keynesianism that preaches spending is good, deficits don't matter, print the money when you need it, have central economic planning, have the government control our education, take over medical care. It's not the old-fashioned type of socialism, but it's an interventionism that pretends it's a little bit freer than fascism. But the failure always comes, and that's what we're witnessing right now. So we have the vehicle to get the information out. At the same time, everybody knows there's something seriously wrong, and people are very frightened and concerned. So the job of us who believe in the alternative are obligated to prevent the alternative, because this system is going to collapse, and we're witnessing that. So what has to be done is they have to be offered an alternative, and fortunately it's a wonderful alternative, and that is the concept of liberty, which is progressing in understanding. You mentioned the Federal Reserve and the monetary system. Today, we have a much better understanding of how a gold standard would work than we did in our early history, because back then they had things like bimetallism, and they allowed states still to expand credit. So there's things that we're advancing on. And even the concept of liberty has advanced. So you don't need governments to preach to individuals on how they supposed to run their personal lives and what their habits should be. So we're making these advancements, but the conflict is there, and the challenge is there, and those individuals who wield the power will not give it up easily. So it's going to be a struggle for the next decade or two.
And do you feel that the struggle between homeschoolers and proponents of government education is a microcosm of the struggle between individualism and collectivism?
There's no doubt about it, because you have the collectivist notion about education and the individual notions about homeschooling. One goal that I had on the homeschooling proposals that I have is the system I have is designed to understand liberty. It's not a homeschooling program which is evangelical and directed in one place. But I'm not opposed to any of that. But if people understand what I'm talking about, it legalizes and encourages all varieties of homeschooling. So you might have a very secular, you might have a religious one, but mine is designed to say that what we need is liberty. And then people will have more options. But I think that it is a conflict between the two, the state versus the voluntarism, and I think education is a perfect example. That you can find that in medicine as well. In spite of all that what's government's done, there are still private sources of medical care in this country that are delivering medical care very cheaply and with high quality. So this is what's happening in education too, because it's not like you have to be super wealthy to homeschool your kids. You need dedication and effort and encouragement, but you don't need a whole lot of money. I mean, the rich send their kids to very, very wealthy private schools, and of course that doesn't guarantee them a better education. I think the people that go to if they get in the right homeschooling program, they're going to get a better education than the very wealthy do by sending them to very rich private schools.
And lastly, could you describe your homeschool curriculum? And also, at what point of your career did you decide to pursue your curriculum?
Well, I've thought about education as a goal for a long, long time. And even the years I spent in government, I was never thinking first. I always thought of myself as a physician that took a break to talk about things I thought were important. Education was most important to me. I don't believe the politicians have much control of anything. Ideas have controls, and that is why I have my own free foundation, and that is why I support the Mises Institute. And as education, Nixon once said, well, we're all Keynesians now. Well, I'd like to see the day when we say we're all Austrian economists now and understand it in a different factor. So my motivation has always been there. And, of course, in talking with Gary North and Tom Woods, who are principals in the homeschooling curriculum, they helped me design this and devise the courses. And the whole goal is to teach the freedom philosophy, which is not available anyplace else. And like I said earlier, it doesn't negate what other people want to do. It just legalizes and permits people to have their own homeschooling. Right now, we have a curriculum set up, and it's free from pre-K up to the 5th grade. It's available at ronpaulcurriculum.com. And every year, we're going to be adding more grades and classes. And there's going to be an opportunity first to study and understand what liberty is all about, where it comes from, and the relationship of the individual to government, and also help teach people to how to defend it, because, you know, we get a bad rap, conservatives and constitutionalists, libertarians, that we're heartless and we don't care. Well, we have to learn how to show that if you really care about people, you don't want to go with an authoritarian dictatorship. You want to go with more liberty, because that's when more people eat better and they live better and they're happier. But we start with those two things, but then if people want to go to college, which we obviously encourage, if that's what their goal is, you can hardly get to be a doctor if you don't go to college and medical school, that it's a preparation for college testing and getting into college. And so many homeschoolers, we haven't had our test yet, but others have been able to get into college at 15 and 16 and 17 years of age. They get in sooner, they do well. And also, if people say, well, I want to go in a different direction, I want to go into business. And so there's going to be a lot of courses available to teach people how to do home businesses. And we have found that not only have we had young people interested in that, we have their parents saying, hey, some of this stuff sounds pretty good, so we better look at it. But it's not for everybody. We're hoping to direct it to those elites who are desirous of knowing this message, because it requires self-discipline, and they have to be motivated. They won't have to buy any textbooks they don't want to buy, because everything is going to be available. The lectures will be available on the internet. And although it'll be similar in some ways to others, it's going to be unique in that it's going to be designed to promote the understanding of liberty and how important it is for the future of this country.
It is a revolution, because homeschooling is either evangelical Christian, or it's secular. This is about, hey, liberty, freedom, libertarian ideas, and then you can do whatever you want. And it really is. The curriculum's amazing. I've been into it even before it came out, because I got advanced copies of it. It's very sophisticated, but also very simple at the same time. I mean, that's what's hard, is to build something simple and elegant that really works well. This is tailor-made to deprogram your children. I've had so many cousins that were properly homeschooled, and they ended up getting better scholarships than everybody else that went to the finest schools. Homeschooling's not for everybody, but this is great. This is certainly a supplement for anyone on top of the regular educational system. School of1776.com. That takes you to the direct subpage of Ron Paul's curriculum website, where you can get the discount and get the first 5 grades free. School of1776.com, or follow the link posted at the bottom of the front page of Infowars.com. Wow. That was a jam-packed transmission. If you just tuned in to this Sunday radio show, it's also a TV show. We stream live video at Infowars.com/show or PrisonPlanet.tv. We have a nightly news show, weekdays at 7 o'clock. The weekday show, 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. And almost all of it is public on AM and FM dial or in video streams. The films, the nightly news is subscription at PrisonPlanet.tv. But everything you heard or saw here today will be posted by tomorrow, including the whole radio/TV show, for radio listeners at Infowars.com and PrisonPlanet.com. We post it all to YouTube a day later, so everybody can see it for free instead of having to subscribe. Subscribers help pay it forward and fund the whole operation. I salute you. In January of this year, I sent Jakari Jackson and other Infowars.com reporters to the west coast of the United States to investigate the reports of massive radiation spikes, 10 times in some cases what the background radiation is supposed to be. Professional groups, private organizations, and citizens alike were going out with their field meters and Geiger counters and picking up huge spikes in San Francisco, Los Angeles, but as far north as Seattle. Jakari and our reporters not only confirmed increased radiation, they found it all over the western coastline.
Why is this not a national news story? Why is this not an international news story that these power plants are registering lower radiation than what is being found in Half Moon Bay?
We had witnessed a coordinated cover-up by Tokyo Electric and the Japanese government of the cancers and deaths and thyroid ailments plaguing Japan in the first 3 years after the disaster. So the question was, is there a cover-up going on in the United States and North America as a whole? Turns out the EPA, within just a few months of the Fukushima disaster, with the trade winds and currents coming right into the United States, had indeed raised the levels of what they claimed was safe for the population. In some cases, more than 1,000 times what they had previously claimed was safe. So we continued to investigate. and noticed that just a few months after Fukushima, tuna had been caught off the coast of the United States with higher levels of radiation. Buried in reports that got little or no attention, we began to discover massive deformities in whales and other sea life, seal die-offs, starfish die-offs, massive fish die-offs. And when our reporters went and tested the fish that were being caught off the coast of California, the radiation levels spiked dramatically.
It's almost double.
There's a reason I sent my reporters to the West Coast. It's to draw attention to the fact that the nuclear industries in the United States and worldwide are out of control. More than 75% of reactors in North America are currently leaking. In the past, every one of these leaks would have been a huge issue. Now, it's as if radiation is good for us. In fact, Ann Coulter and others have come out and said that we should be thankful for the radiation. The Japanese should be thankful because, after all, it's good for them.
Radiation in excess of what the government's says are the minimum amounts you should be exposed to are actually good for you and reduce cases of cancer.
Tell that to all the valiant rescue workers who tried to secure the damaged plant who've now succumbed from radiation sickness and died. And tell that to the sailors and crew of the USS Ronald Reagan, many of which are dead and dying now from radiation poisoning. And the VA will not give them any care and basically puts them on a death panel list to wait and die.
Our sources tell us many were placed on a secret list designed by VA managers to hide the fact veterans were waiting months to see a doctor.
Bottom line, it is important that we draw attention to the fact that this industry is out of control. And we also draw attention to the fact that the federal government itself is ordering millions and millions of dosages of potassium iodide for federal workers while telling the general population that, oh, you don't need to have that unless you live right next door to a nuclear power plant.
They're acting like they're preparing for some sort of nuclear emergency right now, because we now know that the Department of Health and Human Services, for example, they just ordered an unprecedented 14 million doses of potassium iodide, which, you know, protects the body in the event of radioactive poisoning. So the federal government, they are already acting as if there's been a severe nuclear accident. Does that concern you as much as it does me?
Oh, yes, it concerns me not only as a journalist, but as a just general citizen.
The truth is, radiation is an invisible poison that's all around us, and the levels of it are going up. It was in my research to find ways to try to shield my family or mitigate the dangers of increased radiation that I discovered that iodine was a key component and that the government was hoarding it. But the type of iodine they're hoarding is something you only take during a huge disaster, not something that you take on a daily basis that from the research helps your glands and body overall to be healthier. That's why we developed with Dr. Edward Group Survival Shield, a proprietary new form of nascent iodine. Survival Shield has been incredibly popular because of the results people have gotten, but also because it's more palatable and easier for children to take. It's not as harsh as some of the other iodines that are out there. We innovated with Survival Shield Nascent Iodine, and it's still available and is excellent. But we are now very excited to introduce X2. There is no other iodine anywhere near this. The other so-called nascent iodines are black and turn black on paper. The Survival Shield Nascent Iodine turns electric blue purple because it's from the pure crystal. You can literally see these ancient crystals seething with the iodine. If you think Survival Shield was powerful, X2 is the next level. Take the InfoWars challenge. Regardless, you're getting high quality iodine that on record the government admits everyone needs. It's essential, and you're supporting the very tip of the spear in revolutionary pro-liberty media. X2 from InfoWarsLife.com or call toll-free 888-253-3139. There's no other iodine like it on Earth.